important to me. Well, after that, my principal said, hey, I need you to go into general education classes. And I said, only if I could have a co-taught environment. And so I was able to do kind of the best of both worlds there, special ed and general ed. From there, I worked my way to becoming an instructional coach and then the assistant principal at Sutton Middle School. And so this is my first year serving as principal there. And so I am elated to have this rich dialogue and conversation with everyone. And I do look forward to just being a thought partner in what we can do and the work around our Black and brown kids. Nice to be here.
And Dr. Meriwether, you've made some history because aren't you the youngest, correct me, you're the youngest principal in Atlanta Public Schools?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
I thought, yes, I read the articles. That is awesome. Well, we are very esteemed to have you on our panel. Yes. Thank you. And then Dr. Brian Patterson.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. I'm Dr. Patterson, Brian Patterson, Morehouse grad of 1998, which seems, now I feel old when I said it out loud. So my career did not start off in education. I started my career off in business. I was a business major at Morehouse, and I began my career in sales and marketing before I decided to become an educator. When I first started teaching, I taught entrepreneurship at North Springs High School, and now I serve as the work-based learning coordinator at North Springs, giving kids internship opportunities during their junior and senior year of high school.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson is also, my son attends the school that Dr. Patterson works at. And then last, but certainly not least, my good friend, Jason Marshall.
Hey, everyone. As Paquita said, Paquita and I go way back, undergrad and even graduate school. So we've known each other for quite a while, and I appreciate all the support that she's given me through those formative years and into professional life. Much like others on the panel, I have a very traditional background in public education. I was a school teacher, 5th grade. Then I was an assistant principal, and now I am the executive director of Wesley Charter School here in the city, where I've been for the last 7 years. So about a 25, 26-year career, just about done every job you can do in the schoolhouse. And I'm glad to be here with you, glad to share, glad to learn. Oh, and also I am the father of 2 children, and my oldest will be going to Spelman in the fall. So I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations. Awesome. Well, let's take off. Thank you so much, panel, for your introductions. We are going to start this forum with Audrey. Ms. Hampton, the theme of today's forum is improving the quality of life for our children by elevating education. And with the rise in gun violence, social media influence, narrative messaging from society, we protect the quality of life for our children? How can we as parents, educators, and community advocates protect our children from not seeing themselves as disposable? In your role as a director of family life programs, what are the ways that parents and families can advocate for the educational and quality of life outcomes for their children? And I know that was a loaded question, so you can tease that out however you feel necessary.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, those are a lot of amazing questions that I think all parents are kind of asking themselves. I think if we start with, your first question, just around how do we help protect our kids and the way of life that they have with the rising social media influences that they have, the messaging that they're receiving from various parts of society. I'm a parent as well. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm not quite to the point of protecting him further than, him running into things at the moment. But I think that's always a parent's number one concern. How do I keep my kids safe? How do I protect them when they go out into the world? And I think the best answer that I can give having worked with children and adolescents from nursery 3 all the way through grade 12, parents just need to have an open dialogue with their kids. Having honest conversations is the best way that I think you can have some type of influence in your child's life, especially when there's multiple messages that they're receiving from so many different avenues, social media being probably one of the largest influences for some of our older kids and their number one means for how they communicate. I know that parents might feel at times that children are not ready to have certain conversations, especially when it comes to, things like school gun violence. But right now we at my school, I have conversations with our kids when they're 3, just around kind of these topics, because if we don't have them, they're going to receive those messages someplace else. So I always say it's kind of like those insurance company jingles that you hear. It's not that you're buying insurance every single day, but when you do, what do you think about the ones that stand out and that you hear the most? So you want to make sure that your opinions, your voice, your morals are the first thing that your child thinks about when they're put into those really hard situations where they need guidance and there's no one there to really guide them. So I think that's probably the best kind of advice I can give parents, and I give parents, just make sure that you're constantly talking to your kids, even if you're not ready to have the conversations. I promise you they are ready. And if they don't hear it from you, they will receive the messaging from another kind of medium that they might have in their lives. I think another question that you raised here was just around how do parents and families advocate for the educational and quality of life outcomes for their children. As I stated before, I've worked in independent schools my entire career. And so I just want parents to know that they really do have a lot of choices around how to educate their child or what the best setting is for their child. There are amazing public schools, charter schools, private schools, and now there is a surge of virtual education that really does work for some of our kids. So making sure that you look into the right place that's going to feel like it's the best educational setting, because there is not one box that's going to fit all of our kids. And I would suggest that we do that as young as possible. Those statistics are still very real around children who do not read proficiently at a 3rd grade level are 4 times higher to drop out of school. And so you want to encourage kids to have just a love of curiosity, of questioning what's happening around them, which then hopefully folds into their love for learning and the school environment in which they're in. And so I think there are many choices. And even if you don't think that you can financially afford some of the options that are out there, I can attest to it that all educational settings have financial means in order to help support students who really fit their model in terms of this would be a great fit for both the student and the school. And so please don't get discouraged by the financial aspect of some of the educational settings. It's just really about trying to make sure that you're putting your child in the right place that's going to help grow their love, for learning. So I can stop there.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Audrey. I love what you said about the messaging at a young age, because you're right. They, as young as 3, as young as 2, we have seen, and when we consider brain-based research, and we consider preschool, all of the research around developmental in terms of with regard to preschool. One of the things that you said was so important is that messaging at a young age. And I oftentimes, I do a lot of driving. I spend a lot of time. And I also eat out quite a bit. And I'm just always amazed at what I see when I see parents and young kids at a table or in the car. The parent is on the phone. The child is on his or her device. There is no conversation taking place between that child and that parent. I was just at a restaurant the other day, and there were two parents with a child that probably was about 2 or 3. And not to judge or anything, but both of the parents were on the phone the entire time. And so no interaction, no engagement with their child, no conversation. Then on the other table, the table on the right side of me, there was a parent who had a son, I guess maybe about 13, and she was demanding that he put his device down. She even took it from him so that they could engage in that conversation, in dialogue, because you're exactly right, Ms. Hampton. If they are not getting it, that messaging from their parents, they are going to get it somewhere else. And you're right, social media provides that platform for that messaging. And so, you know, I love what you said about that engagement and how that engagement is necessary from a very early age. I want to now turn to Dr. Meriwether, Jason, and Dr. Patterson. Recently, we heard about over 400 students being unenrolled at a South Fulton school. Parents were outraged. And as someone who graduated from public schools in South Fulton, it has always been the case that schools on the South side tend to operate different from schools on the North side. Fulton County Schools is one county, but it appears to operate as 2 separate systems. How do we address these inequities of schools in the North versus the South? And what is not being done? What is not being done to address the overcrowding of schools on the South side and the severe underachievement that some believe that compounds that discrepancy between performance in the North and performance in the South?
Thank you for that, Dr. Morgan. To kick us off, I'll say this. I'm a proud alum of Fulton County Schools, starting from Seaborn Lee Elementary School, then to Camp Creek Middle School, and then to Westlake High School. And so I take pride, in my Fulton County experience. But when you talk about and you lift the inequities happening in the district, as a former student and proud supporter, you're absolutely right there. There are major inequities, seeing things from the principal's end now, but also seeing them as a student. As a student, having to leave Camp Creek Middle School to go to North Springs or the north side of town for certain academic bowls, for certain chess tournaments, for certain things related to student achievement that were not happening on our side of town. And so for me, I think about where's the equity department that Fulton can put into place. Currently, I'm in Atlanta Public Schools, and I'm in North Atlanta and Buckhead, and I'll definitely tell you that there are inequities within our district, but our district has had a streamlined focus on closing those gaps of inequities, but also making sure that all kids in the district, not just where your zip code is, not just how much money your parents make, but there are equitable resources for every student. And so to part one of that question, I would look into Fulton having an equity department where every zone is examined in the district. Next, I'll be honest. As far as the overcrowding that you mentioned, I would say there's a level of accountability, not just on principals, not just on teachers, but I think from the stakeholder engagement and just senior leadership teams in Fulton County as well. And so when you look at the board members, the board of directors, when you look at some of those individuals who are in associate superintendency roles, are they being held accountable for what's happening on the other side of town? And I can't stress this enough, but student voice, that is critical. Student voice, that is impactful. The distinct difference I will tell you is that when there's a parent meeting and there are concerns to be addressed regarding student achievement or overcrowding, I can tell you one thing I've experienced. On the north side, those parents, they show up in waves. They show up, it's almost like they carpool together. You would think they had a charter bus because they are present. But when you come down to the south side, when you come down to my area of Camp Creek, when you come down to Seaborn Lee, those parents, they aren't showing up. And so when I really talk about that accountability, it's really, we say this mantra of it takes a village. It can't just be the school system. It can't just be teachers and principals and other members in the community, but it has to be the parents as well. They have just as a voice as everyone else. The last piece, the underachievement, that's been a thing as well. When you look at the disparities, when you look at the wide gaps of student achievement, it's outstanding based on the peers. And so I would argue about just an examination of data based on zones. What are the problem areas? What does the data say? And then two, when we talk about equity, and back to my whole piece of the equity department, what are the resources that are being given to those schools on the north side of town? And are those schools on the south side, those students, are they getting them as well? And so in my role now as principal, I think the foundation of all of this, I truly would say, as far as the severe underachievement, do you have the right people in place in front of kids? Do you have teachers who really want to be there to grow students? And also, do you have leaders who are in front of these schools who are not afraid to go to their associate superintendents to demand what they need for their kids? And so I say it starts there. Do you have the right people in place? And again, I saw a question in the chat and kind of threw me off about the model of the equity department. I'll get to that shortly. But lastly, with what I was going with that is the level of accountability regarding the data. Westlake High School, if you don't know, is a big school known for sports. When it comes to basketball championships, when it comes to track championships and football, our parents will show up in waves. Our parents will be there, and it'll be a line down the street. That's one thing I can tell you about Westlake High School. However, when we look at some of the academic pieces, and I will say fairly in Westlake, those parents, they are very supportive in Westlake. Most often people say that Westlake is more of like the North School on the South side. That's kind of the stigma Westlake has had. And it's not fair because you have your schools like Banneker, you have your schools like Tri-Cities High School, who are also great schools, and Creekside High School, who are also great schools. But again, what are we doing to truly examine that data and having the right people there? And so I'm done off my spiel for now, but just to make certain that I had answered every layer of that question, those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Merriweather. I'm also a graduate of Westlake, proud graduate of Westlake High School, and also a Fulton County Schools. I want to turn though to Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson, what's your perspective on this issue of inequity, as it relates to these lines that are drawn between districts?
I think, especially in Fulton County, I think there's they say perception is reality, but sometimes perception is not necessarily the truth. So I think in Fulton County, the way the funds are allocated in terms of dollar for dollar, how the schools on the south side are supported versus schools on the north side, you'll probably see that like Westlake looks like a college campus, and so does Langston, so does Creekside. The facilities are equal, and every kid in Fulton County receives the same device. I think as a baseline, we all can agree that overcrowded schools are bad for all students. And at Westlake, what happened at Westlake, I think their school is built to hold 2,300 to 2,400 students. And because Westlake, like Dr. Merriweather said, is viewed as that elite school on the south side, that population swelled. So the kids were walking like elbow to elbow in the hallways, which was dangerous for everyone. So I think the parents, like all the parents, were told that they had to do a residency audit. So they sent out letters to all 2,500 parents of that school. And of that 2,500, you were stuck with 350 parents who are with the protesters now. Of the 350 kids, 150 of those people were in district, and a lot of people are going to Westlake because Westlake now has an IB program. So Westlake is one of only 4 schools in all of Fulton County that has an IB program and is looked at the best place to go to in the South Side. So a lot of those kids didn't belong there, and then there was another group of like 200 parents who never turned in their forms. But the vast majority of parents, like 95% of the parents, did what they were supposed to do. They gave the proof of residency and they didn't have an issue. And that's the accountability part that I think Dr. Mary Rose is talking about as well. As parents, we have to be accountable too. So I think we have to, as a people, I think we have to look for our solutions internally first and not externally. Our public schools especially can't be the end-all solution to fixing these gaps. Like that, Audrey was saying earlier, that parent at the elementary level, reading to that kid and making sure that the kid can read before they get to school, that they're phonic, that they read not just by sight words, but by phonics. Because by the time they get to high school, they try to fix the gaps that might have occurred along that way. It's going to be an impossible journey if we don't start foundationally as early as humanly possible. If there's a kid who is well prepared at the elementary school level, as young as possible, if you have a kid who can read and it even has a curiosity for learning, it's almost impossible for a school to fail that kid. A kid can survive, a kid can thrive, even in a bad school if they're prepared properly at home. So I think we have to take some of that. I think also underlying, Dr. Meriwether said something about sports at Westlake, and that's what they're known for. I think that might be one of the undergirding issues that people don't talk about, because when I looked at the numbers, I said, okay, Westlake was at like 2550 enrollment, but at that level, they go from being a 6A school to a 7A school, and that affects all sports. And whether they said that was one of the reasons they had to make an emergency decision to make sure their population was where it's supposed to be. I believe that personally, I think that's part of the factors too, because people didn't want to move up and be forced to move up in sports class as well. I had one other thing I wanted to say. I think most of the effects of achievement gaps, though, that can be fixed. I think the difference we see from north to south, a lot of those things are happening outside the schoolhouse. I think it's like you said, Paquita, it's what are the conversations that we're having? What is the forced education beyond the school that's going to occur? Because even though on paper, dollar for dollar, the FTE money that's going, or the Title I money that's going to the school might look equitable, the differences happen from this kid on the north side, his parents being able to pay for Kumon or Mathnasium or extracurricular activities. I was at a fundraiser last night in Sandy Springs, and I saw a group of parents raise $70,000 in an hour and a half for something that doesn't even make sense. But it's harder to do. But that extra money and that safety net of being able to support everything that a public school cannot do, I think that's where the real difference is. I don't think it's as systemic as we think it is, because even at Westlake, and there's 99% of the students are Black, but so are 99% of the teachers. They have a Black principal. Every single vice principal is Black. In Fulton County, there's 7 different zone superintendents, and 5 of the 7 zone superintendents are Black. The head superintendent is white, but we have people in place who want the best for those kids, but there's only so much you can do in a public school format. But we can't, it's hard to compete with the stuff that we have no control of outside the classroom. I think I'm rambling, so I'm gonna stop.
No, thank you, Dr. Patterson. I want to turn to Jason Marshall. Mr. Marshall, Dr. Patterson talked about public school, some of the dynamics of public school. Can you provide some context about your school's context? I don't think you're not public. You're private, right?
No, we're a public school. we're a lottery-based school in APS. So
Okay.
yeah, Wesley's it's a charter school. So our students have to live in the city of Atlanta. And if they come through our lottery and they're able to get in, then we operate the same way. I heard, I believe it was Dr. Merriweather or Dr. Patterson mentioned IB. We're an IB school. We also teach Mandarin for 45 minutes a day. So what we are is, we're a choice school. So parents elect to be there. I don't want to repeat too much of what the other two gentlemen had to say, because both of those, their commentary was, I think, spot on. I would like to lift a couple things about this divide that we see in school districts. And I want to be clear, you see that in a lot of school districts, not just Fulton County, not just APS. You see it in DeKalb, you see it in Clayton. It's just the way that we've segregated ourselves, the way we live here in America in school districts. You typically have an east side and a west side, or a north side and a south side. That's kind of how school districts and just are the way that we pattern ourselves in how we live. So you get that. I think it's important, though, when you talk about leaderships in school systems, principals are critical. They're critical. Having been one for 11 years, I believe in the power of the principalship. But I'll also tell you, another very powerful voice and the power, the person or the persons that get things done in school systems, they're school boards. So when you talk about a lens of equity, I think Dr. Merriweather said that. I think if you want equity, it has to start with that lens on everything, right? You can't have all of these other things. We're doing data, we're doing a SPLOS program, we're adding this for so-and-so. But if you don't start from a place of equity, right? And it starts with the leadership from the school board, telling the superintendent, who tells the principals, who tells the regional superintendents, this is the way that we're going to do things, then you don't have that. So I think we have to start with the school board. I would challenge people to look at their school board. We talk about this all the time, right? We all come out when it's time for the presidential election, right? How many of us skip our school board election? We think, I'm busy. I got something to do. I got to get the kids something to eat. Got to pick up my dry cleaning. But you know what? That school board election impacts your life a whole lot more than the presidential election does. Mm-hmm. So just something to think about. I won't belabor that. But I did want to highlight that.
Well, thank you so much, Jason, for that insight. And you're exactly right. I don't think I pay very much attention to who those individuals are that are elected to our school boards. And, yes.
Please let me just say one other thing when you finish this.
Absolutely, Dr. Hill, jump right in.
The other piece to this, having been in Fulton County as the associate superintendent for a number of years, please know that you're absolutely right, Jason. There are more than 9 to 10 municipalities, and it's a 75-mile ride from one end of the district to the other end of the district. And what happens, it is the school board and it is the parents. Those are the two pieces that you have control over with the vote. You would be surprised at how many principals don't know who their school board member is until something bad happens. They vote for the same people over and over again, you get the same results. You don't look at the record of these people. You look at the parents who they buy homes in one area for one reason and one reason only, the schools. They congregate and they think alike and they do work. I think was Mr. Merriweather said, or Dr. Merriweather said, they come out in droves. I've seen it at school. I've stood before school board meetings and you couldn't get in because it was an issue about rezoning and that it was not going to be a plaything. But I just want people to know your school board member. Jason was right on target. You need to know who's making decisions for your children and the budgets that they have. You need to know that you're going across lines. I was there when they would bus their children at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning to the north side to get a better education. Still, it's not there. And we can talk about the inequities. That budget must be addressed, and you need to come on budget nights and see where the money is going. They have to do equity to a degree, but all that doesn't happen with that budget. The parents on the north side will put it in. They've built all kinds of stadiums. They've built all those things that their students needed. They have them. We have to put our money where our mouth is as well. And we need to know who these people are, who's making decisions for you. It's
And
just
Dr. Hill, that I want to hold there because you made a great comment that came from one of our attendees, a question about the replacement schools, those that are being built in the North End versus the South End. Can you speak to that again, Dr. Hill? And I'm just reading the question from the participant. There are replacement schools being built in Roswell, Crabapple Middle, Sandy Springs, Riverwood High School. I know North Springs High School is slated for, I think, I don't know if there's going to be totally demolished, but construction. Can you speak to why we may not know? And someone, I think it was either Dr. Patterson or Dr. Merriweather that said, you do have a nice campus, Westlake, very nice campus, Langston Hughes. But when we're thinking of overcrowding, why isn't that a consideration so as much in the South Side, on the South Side?
Okay, first of all, there are more board members on the North Side. And when they go in to talk, I've heard it 100 times. It's always my constituents. They don't say the school system. The parents who are in this district in Roswell, these are my constituents, and they need a new school. They've had them. This is the way it goes. But down on our side, I used to tell the parents all the time, you got to beat the drum harder. You got to come to board meetings. You got to stand up for those rights that you have. The reason why they are getting it up there because they have the votes. They have the votes to get what they want for their school districts on the northern end. It is a great divide because even if you look at how people vote, that North Side is typically a Republican North Side. It's just the way it is. It's up that road, the further up you go, the more Republicans you have. Further down you go in the South, we vote the traditional Democratic way all the time. And it's about the vote. It is who carries the votes and who have the votes to make those decisions about schools and how they should fund it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. That's very, very, again, very insightful. I want to, so that the hour is well spent, but I want to turn to Jocelyn, Attorney Jackson, and Dr. Merriweather. The hot topic, and I mentioned this in my opening about this anti-Blackness legislation. So the hot topic right now in recent legislation is that censors what teachers can teach with regard to divisive concepts, critical race theory, and now African Americans. We've heard that recently in the media. House Bill 1084, the Protect Students First Act, defines divisive concepts, scapegoating, race stereotyping, and what it means to espouse personal political beliefs. Dr. Merriweather, I'll start with you. As a principal, and as one of the youngest principals in the country, how are you helping teachers navigate these uncharted waters? And then Attorney Jackson, what are the legal implications of these laws? And do you see long-term effects of these laws? So we'll start with Dr. Merriweather.
Yeah, that is a loaded question, very heavy there, as you can imagine. And so just thinking about CRT and knowing that it's an academic concept, almost 40, 50 years serving as a social construct, my view at the middle school level as a principal is a bit different. Serving as a principal in Atlanta Public Schools in one of the most diverse schools in the district at almost 1,800 students, I will tell you that the legislation, for the most part, it really does not have an impact right now on my middle schoolers. Now, this is what I will tell you. I will tell you that we are also an IB school, similar that we said about Westlake earlier in conversation. And so when we look at the components and the elements of being an international baccalaureate school, it's about giving those students that real world perspective, giving them a real world application, and students applying what's happening in the world, but also what's happened in the world in the past to make those deeper connections. And so personally, if I'm removing my principal hat, I do believe that we should be able to share certain information with our kids and not withhold anything of the sort. However, as a principal, like I said, as a large school district, for me, I play this area, Paquita, about, how should I say this? A fine line with state standards that's being taught. And so for us, the foundation at Sutton, as far as having these conversations, to your original question, is it starts at the planning table. When our teachers, whether they're social studies, Georgia studies, and they're teaching various topics, and we're tying into where do we think this conversation may lend itself? How do we think this may happen with kids, or what would be their perspective, knowing exactly what the standards are, but being able to plan for misconceptions, or being able to say, hey, students may take this angle, and if they say this is what we should say as teachers. And so my thing is this, as an IB school, and I'll kind of wrap up on this and turn it over to Jackson, but it's okay to present the information to students. I think that it's perfectly fine for them to develop and construct their own meaning and opinions. But what's not okay is when you have adults who are shoving information just down the throats of students and who wants them to just take on their opinion, their perspective. And so again, my angle is a bit different being in a diverse school. But for me, like I said, the middle school level, it hasn't been a hot topic for us, but we have had conversations regarding race and then embedding that into our curriculum by following our state standards.
Thank you, Dr. Merriweather. So, Attorney Jackson, you're of course an attorney, and so when we think about these laws, what are the implications, and then do you foresee long-term effects of these laws, such as House Bill 1084 and these other anti-Black legislative pieces?
So, okay, I'm not an education attorney, but I'll speak from this just kind of from a general standpoint. Paquita, you and I are the same age, right? And when we were in school, the world was huge, right? In the sense that whatever our teachers told us was the be all and the end all, because we didn't really have as much access to information. Mm-hmm. Even when we were in college, we had to walk a country mile and go through microfiche just to get basic information that our children can access in 2 seconds now, right? And so the implications of a policy like this would have been much greater for us, I believe, than it is now, simply because of the fact that the world has gotten smaller. Children have access to much more information, and the things that teachers are communicating to them is a fraction of their overall impression, because they're getting information from so many different directions and from so many different places, information that we did not or would not have had access to. So, is it bothersome? Yes. But the reality is that we've been living and been educated under this exact same type of framework from, since segregation, right? When we had to go to school, when we all had to start going to school together, which is, a time that we're not that much removed from, where information was drastically altered in order for us to have a certain impression of our country's history and things like that. And it wasn't codified. I mean, that was just kind of the way it was. But now we're going to be our children will be experiencing the same thing, except for it's going to be something that's on the books. The implications, though, I don't think are as significant. Okay. It's bothersome, yes, but I don't think that the implications are as significant.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate your perspective on that. Is there another panelist that would like to address how your teachers or how you are navigating House Bill 1084.
I want to just chime in and say one thing, Paquita, to piggyback off of what Jocelyn said. I think this is my pie in the sky vision, but I think we have to get to a point that we're not beholden to them to tell us what we can educate, how we can educate our kids or what we can teach them. I think other groups, like when the Jewish kids go to their Saturday school to learn about their history, or the Chinese kids go to their Chinese school outside of school hours, they're not getting permission for what curriculum they can teach. I think we have to get to the point that we have to say, for us, we need to change. We need to have every single Black church in America, there's more Black churches than our schools, have a day that we can develop our own curriculum and teach our own people what we want to do, and doesn't have to have permission from anybody's school system.
Interesting.
And one of the challenges that we have just generally as a folk is that we have got to get out of the mindset that it is the school's responsibility solely to educate our children. There's this thought process of, okay, I'm going to drop you off in the morning at 7:15. I don't know, and you're going to catch the bus and get home at 3:15. And these people better teach you everything you need to know during that time period. And I don't want to hear, I want to see good grades. In some household, passing is enough, right? You better be passing, not in mine, but passing. You better be passing all your classes. And that's all that folks are concerned about. And people have got to be more involved and engaged in the substance of the educational delivery than we are seeing occur. We got to go up to the schools more than just when somebody says something wrong to Junior about something or another. You need to, know the teachers, know what your child is learning. And somebody said something earlier, and I just wanted to bring this up because it was just an interesting point. I think it was you, Brian, where I remember literally had this conversation in my household yesterday. I remember when I was in kindergarten, Mrs. Mosby's class and Miss King's class, they call you to the front one by one, and they say, read this, tell me these colors, whatever. If you could read, which I could read well when I was in kindergarten. I went to Mrs. King's class, and the ones who couldn't went to Mrs. Mosby's class. When we graduated from high school, that division, the same kids who went to Mrs. King's class were in the advanced curriculum classes, and the kids that went to Mrs. Mosby's class were in resource. Mm-hmm. There was no opportunity. There was no real effort made to bring those kids up to where we were. And it wasn't a reflection of their intellectual capacity. Mom and dad might have had to work a lot. Mom and dad may not have been educated themselves. And so there was no real effort to cure those disparities. And one of the things that we have to do, and one of the things that we did when we were on campus, was we used to work with kids before they went to school. We would volunteer with these younger children to get them so that when they did get to elementary school, when they got to kindergarten, they were on a level playing field, or they were advanced. But if we get to them afterwards, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Thank you so much, Attorney Jackson, for that perspective. And I want to transition back to Audrey, but before doing so, I want to read a couple of comments in the chat. Dr. Barbara Hill is correct. I was a part of a parent group that pushed for the construction of Sandtown Middle School in South Fulton County. It was not in the school board's budget, but parents from Guilford Forest, Montclair Estates, and other subdivisions went to school board meetings, spoke with board members, and we got a new school.
That's right.
I love it. Then we have another comment. Parents are supposed to be the child's first teacher. And another comment, I am still involved. My family home in Suttles Landing Townhome Community off Fairburn Road in the city of South Fulton is zoned for the Tri-Cities clusters. We have invited our school board member to an HOA, the HOA Zoom meeting. And I also attended the community meeting recently of Francesca Warren, the school board member assigned to the Westlake cluster. We need more parents involved. My son is a product of Fulton County Schools, but I am still fighting for what we deserve for our tax dollars. And so I love those comments. And I am also a product of South Fulton. I have been here all my life. And Cliftondale Elementary School when it was the old Cliftondale Elementary School, and then on to Westwood, and then it changed from Westwood to Westlake. So yes, I love to hear the advocacy that is needed for South Fulton schools. But Audrey, I want to shift gears here. The impacts, we know that our students of color, our Black and Brown students are still reeling from the impacts of the global pandemic. The global pandemic has had severe implications in every facet of society. And again, going back to this theme of elevating education for the quality of life for our children, what are some red flags that parents and community leaders need to be aware of? And are there opportunities to benefit from the impacts of the pandemic?
Oh, okay. Yes. Let's get into this pandemic conversation. And just to put out there, I'm also a product of both Atlanta Public School and Fulton County. Went to elementary school at Continental Colony. Then I was in the minority to majority program, which I hope they relabeled that these days.
It's not there anymore.
Okay, or they just got rid of it and shipped me off to Ridgeview, and then I did graduate from Tri-Cities High School. So I am very interested in all this conversation since I haven't lived in Atlanta in over 10 years. So thank you all for highlighting some of those inequities that I experienced as a student, and unfortunately, it sounds like it's still prevalent to this day. I would say, shifting to what has come from the pandemic, there are some real benefits, I think challenges that have happened because of COVID, but also some real opportunities that has probably enlightened a lot of the educational system. One that I just, I'll keep going back again. I do not work in public schools. And so I do believe that parents have choices in how they can educate their children. And so I would say there have been a number of success stories around students moving away from your traditional, I sit in a classroom for, a 50-minute class for 7 classes a day. And then we're wondering why not all of them are successful in that particular model, which is how our schools have engaged kids over the years. And I think virtual school has been very helpful for a lot of students in many ways. And I think that could be a very successful model for some students. I think for many students, that was not necessarily the case. And we have seen the large gaps in reading, writing across the board. Emotional wellness of our kids is also a really significant factor that I'm seeing in schools right now that at least we're trying to pay more attention to, because for many students who their escape is school, where their home life is not their peace. It's also not where they can get their needs fulfilled. I think the pandemic, has also highlighted the fact that we have to provide that the schools are providing certain social services for students. And you can probably see that across different school systems in terms of the equity piece as well. So I think, it has revealed a lot of the inequities that maybe people who have been in education have already known. And I'm hoping that we don't lose sight of all of the things that we learned from the pandemic. But there are some really interesting things that we're going to have to focus in our kids around. I have nursery 3 students who are what we consider our pandemic babies, who now we're having to engage them in very different ways of education in terms of just communicating, engaging with other people. Some of their social development that might have already been in place prior to them starting school is delayed at this point because they haven't interacted with anyone besides their families, their parents, even sometimes. And so we're having to start from some of our younger students, and then growing all the way to our high school students who are really suffering in a lot of different ways and with their emotional well-beings, just because of the social media influences, whether that's positive or negative, the lack of community that they felt over those few years, and also the access that they have to understanding, or what they feel they understand, is the mental health aspect that they're kind of going through at the time. So I don't have any of the answers to any of those questions, but I know that the pandemic has definitely revealed some more of the inequities. But I hope that there are some things that we learned from there. I know one of the biggest things for my school is that we engaged in a later start time for our students starting next year, as that came from the pandemic, where they were starting later in the day. And for adolescents, really understanding their sleep cycles a little bit better. So I'm hoping that there are some positives that we can learn from the pandemic, but it has taken its toll, I think, on a lot of students, as well as educators who are flocking out of the education world, because it is they are finding that it is a very hard job. One, it is a significantly underpaid, undervalued profession that we are in. And it is tough to go into a job every single day when you maybe have experienced, a hybrid or remote kind of world, and the state of education isn't changing. So I also think we're going to have to really pay attention to how are we going to attract great educators into this field, because we are losing them every single day.
And Audrey, I love what you just said, because I work for, as President Lance Lucas mentioned, the state of Georgia, and that is one of the initiatives or issues that we are confronted with every day, is the teacher pipeline, and how do we insulate the teacher pipeline, and how many teachers we have lost since the pandemic. And so that leads me to Dr. Patterson and Mr. Marshall and Dr. Meriwether. You all are all Black male educators. And when we consider that the teaching workforce, now we already know, as Ms. Hampton indicated, the teacher workforce is dwindling. We know we are in really a crisis mode. But when we think about Black male teachers, males of color, the workforce is the educator workforce is comprised of less than 2% of males of color. What messaging in society discourages males doing careers in education? And do Black male students continue to lag behind other groups in achievement as a result of not seeing themselves? Because we know the research supports that even with excuse me, even with having one male teacher, we know that the research supports that a male student having exposure to one male teacher decreases the dropout rate. So that, I mean, that's to me, that's critical. So what do you all say as Black male educators? What's the problem?
I guess I'll go first. I think there's a couple problems, and I'm conflicted because my opinion is all over the place on this topic. One, I think it depends exactly where that student sees the Black male educator. I think at the elementary school level, well, Blacks are overrepresented in special ed, especially black boys, especially when you talked about behavior disorders and stuff like that. And at the elementary school level, especially, that our job is overly dominated by white females. So when you have the two polar opposites demographically, white females and Black males, and those are the kids when they get labeled in elementary school a behavior disorder, it's going to stay with them. But I think a lot of that is because that those two populations are so diametrically opposed that they don't understand each other as much. But I think too, sometimes I think we might I think it's very important for Black males and females to see Black men as role models. But I don't know if we put too much emphasis that's why there's an achievement gap, because in my lifetime, I've never seen a Chinese principal or vice principal, and it's not holding them back from achievement. So I don't think they say, hey, if there was just more Chinese teachers, the Chinese kids would be doing even better academically. So I think sometimes we're looking for factors when I always come back to the same factors that we can fix 90% of our problems ourselves in the home, outside of the school. And my last part is, I think we have, because of social media now, and kids, we look at kids and we talk to them, especially Black parents. We look at our kids like they're adults. Sometimes we forget that their minds still aren't fully developed until their 20s, and they're making decisions and rationales about things they do not understand. So my doctor is in financial literacy, and I realized that most adults are financially illiterate. And when we talk about teaching as a profession, the common philosophy is that, teachers don't make any money, and social media is showing these people instant gratification, people who are 20 years old and they're millionaires instantaneously. And the common knowledge is teachers don't make any money. But if you take two 30-year-old teachers who are married to each other making $65,000 a year apart, they're making $130,000 as a household, and that $130,000 as a household is more than 90% of people in America. But you still have high school students who will look at you and say, hey, you're broke, or this, or teachers don't make any money, because they have no concept of money. But as teachers, we do a bad job sometimes talking about using the narrative of the broke teacher philosophy, and that's not inspiring anyone to become an educator, when the truth of the matter is it's relative. And most of the educators here make more money as a household than the kids that are in front of them. But those kids in the household are thinking that you're one ramen noodle away from selling fentanyl or something like that. So that's my thought. I know it's kind of sporadic, but that's where I'm at with mine.
Brian, you hit on some things that really you stole some of my ideas. I wouldn't first say that. But I would say, Paquita, when you ask about why we don't see so many Black males into the profession, I'll be honest. I think, as Brian mentioned, as far as the pay, I would say, with social media and you look at pay, and we all can sit on this call and we can say, we see these videos where you see certain kids attacking teachers and you see these things happening in schools. And so that's discouraging. Now, I'll be honest, I know I'm young, but when I was growing up, we didn't have an Instagram, we didn't have all these things. So things happening in schools, we weren't aware unless it was like on the news or unless it made national headlines. But I think now there is a fear. And I'll be honest with you, just as a Black male, seeing so many of my brothers not only have to deal with that, but also with some of the young ladies. If we're going to call a spade and be honest, I see so many male educators who were these kids nowadays, Paquita, they will Facebook you, they will Google you, they will find your Instagram. And the reality of it is male educators, or educators in general, I should say, forget the Black male piece, we have a life outside of work. And so when you get high school students, well, even now middle schoolers, they're Googling you. They want to know who's this, who's that, and they're looking at your personal life. And then take it a step further, Paquita, you have some of these students who are now DMing people, DMing their teachers, going with these stories or fabricating these narratives. Oh, Jonathan, my math teacher DM'd me on Twitter. He wants to whatever. And so I think when you see that narrative and you see so many Black males who are looking at other males, whether it's on TV or whether it's on social media or in the local news, it's discouraging. It's not anything that would make you want to go run towards kids, especially the ones who really need you, especially those kids who may not even have a Black male figure in their life or even in their immediate household. And so when you take that, and I'll be honest, one of my buddies was considering teaching, but literally just last week, he said, why would I go deal with some of the foolishness happening in schools where these kids are attacking the teachers? The parents are even coming up to the school trying to fight the teacher as well. And so when we take, and I'm about like Brian here, I'm all over the place, but I'm passionate about this question, Paquita, because you're right. It's not many of us in this field, but there are so many factors, just even how the Black male is already looked at, just the narrative about Black males. And then for me, it makes me upset when I go into a school and where there are Black males, when the Black males are only in the ISS teacher or the PE teacher or the custodian. That's a problem for me. That's a problem. So I'll end on this note. At Sutton, I will say, being a diverse school where we're a third Black, a third white, a third Hispanic, I will say that I do see more of my Black students being able to make connections with Black teachers. When they're having difficulties in other classrooms where the teacher may not look like them, they're able to build relationships. And for the most part, 95% of that, Paquita, those are Black females who are in the school. But the few Black males who I do have, you could tell some of the kids, they're longing, they're wanting that Black male presence because they aren't getting it. And so I'll end on that note because we'll be here till 5 o'clock fooling around with me. But that, like I said, this is a powerful question. But in my opinion, Paquita, those are just some of the things I think why we don't see so many Black males in this field.
Jason, what is your, thank you, Dr. Merriweather. I want to hear your insight.
Well, sure. I'm happy to report to the group because there's a lot of Spelman and Morehouse folk on this call. At our school, we have 123 members on our staff, and of that 123, 10 are Morehouse grads. There's probably another 12 or so Spelman grads. And then outside of that, we have various other HBCUs and other schools that other folks have gone to. So we have Black folks in front of Black children, and it makes a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. I think when our young people can see us in those roles, it inspires them to want to emulate that and to go on and to do other things. One of the things I'd like to point out, though, is, kind of when I was coming along and, I said my class earlier, but I'll kind of date myself when I say this, coming along, it was what? Preacher, teacher, doctor, lawyer, right? Those are the things that you could grow up and aspire to be. Well, out of all my friends, I'm the only one that went into teaching. Right. They're, doing all kinds of wonderful things all across, our country. So that's a wonderful thing to see happen. But just like these other brothers said, fortunately, I missed the social media thing, so I don't have the students DMing me. I don't have an Instagram or a Facebook or anything like that. And I think it's actually served me well because of the number of incidents that I have to deal with where these young folks are getting into our teachers and our administrators' social media profiles is more than a notion. And I usually have to turn to somebody much younger than me on my staff to deal with it for me. So, it's problematic. And I don't know that there's one right answer for that. What Brian said earlier, and it struck me because I have probably 9 or 10 folks on our staff that are from either Korea or Taiwan or China. And you know, those kids, they go to Saturday school, they do other things that are outside of what our students do. You know, we all are kind of on Saturdays, our young people, particularly our boys, are worshiping at the ballpark, at the football field. So that's church for us on Saturday mornings. And so the more that we can get away from that, the more that, just kind of in summary, some of the things I've heard, the more that we can focus in our homes about what's important. Those are the things that are going to impact our young people the most, and it'll carry over into school. So that's really where it begins and ends. There wasn't anything that I got from school that I didn't get first from Ave and Joe Jr. Okay. And so at the end of the day, they gave me everything that I needed to go forward. And I think if we can think about that and encourage our families that way, and quite frankly, at this point, and this is something I've learned through the pandemic, I have started to have very frank and direct conversations with our parents just about things. I think the pandemic kind of opened all things up and just said, hey, you know, let's take the cap off this thing and really talk about what's going on. And I've chosen to really approach it that way, particularly probably in the last half of my career. That's what I want to do. And so I think if we take that approach, we can make a difference.
Thank you, gentlemen. Go ahead, Doctor.
I was going to say, Jason, real quick, you might not have an Instagram, but when I Googled you, I found some Freaknik 1994 pictures that popped up. So I'm sure.
Hey, I'm Paquita's laughing. I'm world famous for that. There I am.
Hey,
Paquita, I need to say, go ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Hill.
Yes. I need to get a plug in for higher ed for just a half a second.
Well, and Dr. Hill, my question is getting ready to tie to that.
Okay.
I definitely, my next question was geared towards you, and we really probably have only a few minutes for this last question, and I want you and Jocelyn to tie in on this, to comment on this. But Dr. Hill, it appears that HBCUs, we're all on this call because we are graduates of, well, not because, but we are graduates of HBCUs. And HBCUs have gained renewed prominence and attention. Senator Sonia Halpern recently had a press conference to discuss findings from the Senate Study Committee HBCUs. And for those of you that are not aware, Senator Sonia Halpern is the chair of the HBCU Senate Study Committee. Would you say, Dr. Hill, that HBCUs are in as good as, better, or worse as a result of the pandemic? And why hasn't HBCU education become more attractive with regard to post-secondary education?
Interesting question. Number one, I think that we are moving the needle better. It is getting better. More students are coming to HBCUs now for one reason, and this is what I hear all the time. I need an HBCU experience. I've been in predominantly white settings, and it's not the same because here I am. I can walk right into your office as department chair. At other schools, I have to get an appointment, but you're willing to engage with me. One of the things we are having to learn is that the funding we got, this is where the policy comes back in. The money that the Biden administration prepared for HBCUs really helped our students. It was better off. They were able to delay paying money on their loans. We got money for computers. We received the help. Most of you know that HBCUs are people who function on tuition-driven financial literacy for all of us. We have to have the money to move it forward, and that's why the tuition is so high. And this is why most of our students they moved away from us. But what they do get and what they do talk about all the time is the engagement of advisors who care about them, who are pushing them to finish and complete. We have a dean, Dr. J. Fidel Turner. has done a phenomenal job in supporting. I live it. I see what he does with the students and how we engage and how we are getting new programs. But most importantly, this is what I want all parents to know. These are not 9-to-5 jobs that these students are seeking. They are not going back to the workforce like their parents and grandparents did. These are students who would like virtual opportunities. These are students who are being entrepreneurs. I have a 24-year-old grandson, and that's all. He is in public health administration right now, but as he says, his side gig is selling these suits, what a jogging suits he has and hats, and this is him. This is what he wants to do, but he loves public health. The thing that we have to realize is this: America is number 14 in the nation, in the country, in all worldwide, in terms of educated population. Sweden is number 1, Japan is number 2, and Switzerland is number 3. We're number 14 in terms of who we educate and how we educate them. We are battling to get our children back on. The problem we've had is the technology, the lag in underserved communities. Those mothers and fathers did not know how to use that technology to help their children. And they depended upon the teachers who were learning themselves how to be a virtual teacher. Those are major problems that we have to combat here. And the last thing I want to say is, please, everybody, remember this. These are not the same children that we were, not even you, not me. These are survivors. These are resilient children who've gone through a pandemic that we did not have, we didn't understand. They're different in gender, they're different in race and ethnicity. I can't even say it right now. Ethnicity, I get it. Class, residential status, religion. What happened to the church? Where are the churches? Where are the Black churches? That was mentioned. Where are our churches? The church is graying. Most people are sitting at home on Sundays looking at this, and they're not coming back, and their holistic health is greatly being impacted. They're seeing family members die, and they deal with street violence every day. These students are very resilient people, and they're working hard to get this degree. Their way out of poverty is education, and we have to help give it to them. And at HBCUs, we are working very hard to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. And I appreciate working with you on a daily basis. You and I really are colleagues, and I know what you all are doing there at Clark at Atlanta University to support your students as they matriculate. And Dr. Hill, I want to hold there. I want to turn to Attorney Jackson. Attorney Jackson, you have daughters. You mentioned your 2 daughters and niece that are matriculating at Spelman. Why was Spelman? This is this forum is being hosted by the National Alumni Association of Spelman College, the Atlanta chapter. Why was Spelman an important choice for daughters? And as a Spell mom, you feel your daughters were prepared for Spelman's rigor?
So first, it was important to me, it has always been important to me that my children attended HBCUs, particularly Spelman, because Spelman had a profound impact on the trajectory of my life, profound. I grew up 30 minutes from where James Byrd was dragged. I grew up, the town next door, Vidor, Texas. Black folks didn't stop there. If even into the 90s and early into the 2000s, you knew that if you were going, further into Texas, you just did not stop. Okay. Though that was the environment that I grew up in. And so when I discovered Spelman, the summer before my senior year, I came for the early college program, and I stayed for 6 weeks, and I went back to Texas reluctantly and told everybody, I am only here to serve my time so I can go back to where I belong. And I never left, right? And so when I knew the true impact that Spelman had on me in my view of the world. And I did not, it's like you don't realize how much Spelman is changing you or has changed you until you leave. Until you have to go back out into the real world, and there are white men who expect for you to kowtow to them because they're white men, but you don't know nothing about that because you've only been around, in an environment where race isn't a factor and sex isn't a factor. And so your intellect and your personal development is allowed to grow without any of those external interferences. And so that was something that I very much wanted my children to experience. And so my daughters and my niece, they came with me to every, Paquita, you were there. They came with me to every reunion. They were walking around and working. They went to every class day. They knew the Spelman hymn, right? Because for them, Spelman was the natural. Just like you're going to the 12th grade, you're going to Spelman right on afterward. That's just the natural thing. Because I just know how important it is. And they may not even realize how important it is until they get out into the real world and are able to demonstrate that confidence that they don't really even realize that they have. In terms of how we prepared them for the rigor of Spelman, we have been fortunate enough that we are one of those families that literally went onto greatschools.com and said, we want a school that meets all of these numbers. And then we literally bought this house solely for the purpose of knowing that our children were going to be in 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 schools from kindergarten all the way through high school. And that has worked out beautifully for us. But we go to every open house. My mom is a 40-year educator. She retired from Creekside High School. She moved from Texas and came to Georgia. She retired from Creekside High School. And my mom went to every open house. And we literally pooled our resources to make sure that we got the best teachers who met with our individual children's personalities, because one teacher a teacher who worked for one kid wasn't necessarily a great fit for the other kid. We were involved in the community. We got to know people because there was so much information here that you don't know about unless you are an engaged parent. Parents who are not engaged, their children miss out on a multitude of resources simply because the parents just don't know which parents to talk to and all of that kind of stuff about different things. And so, in terms of rigor, it's always going to be involvement. And another thing too is the intellectual development of our children expands, and I said this before, outside of the academic environment at school. When my children, every morning when they woke up for school, the news was on. They didn't listen to the radio. You listen to Good Morning America from the time you wake up until the time you leave. And we're going to talk about what is going on in the world. Because when my daughter was in the 7th grade, my oldest daughter, one of her teachers literally told her in this school that we cherry picked, that Black slave owners were more harsh to the slaves than white slave owners were. So there was a whole, those who know me know that was not a good scene, But, we had to, those were the things that we had to address. But had our children not been interactive with us, if we were not having conversations at the dinner table, if we were not watching the news and talking about current events, that's a conversation that probably never would have come up. She never would have even known that it was something wrong or just absurd about what was said. So it's very difficult to know, because the rigor at Spelman now is not the rigor that was at Spelman when I was there.
Mhm.
And just kind of to know, because, you know, AP and honors classes at one school is different from AP and honors classes at another school. And there are people that I have worked with who have come out of public schools here in the city who were valedictorians in their class who could barely put sentences together. So we weren't able to, so we never used, okay, you're in honors as a barometer. You know, we kind of had to be talking to other people. What are your kids doing? What are your kids working on? Because you can't, like I said, you can't rely solely on the schools to ensure that your kid is getting everything that they need in order to be successful. You just simply can't. And what makes me sad about that is when we have conversations like this, the parents who really need to hear this are not listening. They're not even aware that these conversations are happening. And there are so many children who could benefit from the knowledge that we're sharing, but they simply don't have, they simply don't have the access to it. And as educators, that's one of the biggest things that, one of the biggest pieces of sympathy that I have for you all in trying to do what you do is that you know what it takes in order for these kids to be successful. You just can't do it on your own in the time and with the resources that you're given.
Yes. And Attorney Jackson, that gives us some food for thought as we expand this forum next year. Try maybe looking at getting more parents and even more students involved in these forums. And so, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time this afternoon. But this has been, and I've seen in the chat, I've read, great forum. People are amening and co-signing on many of the things that all of the panelists said. And so I am grateful, but I do want to close out the forum and honor everyone's time by just saying thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your time, your service to NAASC Atlanta chapter. I am going to turn it back over to our President Adrienne Lance Lucas, for closing remarks.
So Paquita, a resounding round of applause, and to all of our panelists, this has been fantastic. We always learn so much every single year on what we can do more of, and hearing the various perspectives in bringing our Morehouse brothers on. That was a very, very nice touch. So thank you for everything that you have done to carry this banner forward for education. We really appreciate it. We have a couple of announcements that I want to put out because the chapter meeting is coming up on March the 4th. So we hope to see you there at 3 o'clock. It will be virtual this time. On March the 8th is our Spelman Day at the Capitol. So you heard a couple of legislative items that we should be considering. And so we hope that you show up for Spelman Day at the Capitol on March the 8th this year so that we can continue to discuss some of these issues. Number one, Senator Halpern will be there. She is sponsoring it's Senate Bill 235, which is a new planning district around the Atlanta University Center. On this Tuesday at 8 a.m., she'll be in the Coverdale Legislative Building. So if anyone is available to show up and show support for this bill as she speaks about the other things that are needed for HBCUs and our surrounding communities, please be there. On March the 11th, we will have our walk. Y'all, we have a mayor. The mayor of Forest Park is a Spelmanite. So we are joining her on March the 11th to walk her district. And then on the 14th of March, we will have a real estate investment session in Forest Park. So if you're looking to invest or pool your money for an area just outside of the city, please join us for that activity. So I know that's a mouthful. There are lots of activities coming up, but you can always check the website, NAASC Atlanta spelled out.org, for all the latest activities. So Paquita, well done. And to the rest of you, enjoy the rest of the remaining part of your weekend. God bless.